I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house. I've got another request review for you. This time the requests come from Brandon Jones. Now we all know that the US took the Italian giallo movie and gave it this sort of fast food franchise treatment and created the slasher subgenre. So what happens then when an Italian filmmaker, schooled and steeped in the grand giallo tradition, chooses to make as his debut feature a slasher movie? Well, we get a film that's known in some quarters as Deleria, Aquarius, Bloody Bird. Round these parts, we know it as Stage Fright. If any of you will have movies that you'd like to request that I check out and talk about, please let me know. If I've got them or can accommodate you easily, I will do my absolute very best to do so. In the meantime, as a sort of Clarice and Hannibal quid pro quo, why don't you hit me up with a thumbs up or a thumbs down? I understand that helps with the algorithms. Or you might like to join me on Twitter at Grumpy Andrew, where I generally ramble about horror movies, and I'm thinking of starting more regular tweets, perhaps cryptic clues as to the movies I'll be reviewing next, and maybe just opening up the horror conversation across different platforms. But let's get into the meat, bone, and indeed feathers of Stage Fright. The film is about a group of stage actors and crew performing last-minute overnight rehearsals for their musical about a killer. When one of them turns up dead in the car park outside, the police arrive and it's assumed that the killer has fled the scene. The other actors are persuaded to stay and continue rehearsals with the promise that the sensational murder headlines in the news will bring in morbidly curious punters and the show will be a smash hit. They lock themselves in the theatre for the night, unaware that an escaped mental patient responsible for the murder has been locked in with them. It sounds like the setup for an urban legend, doesn't it? Right at the very start, director Michele Soavi is letting you know front and centre about the elaborate facade that is filmmaking. We start off sort of in media res with a woman being attacked by a killer, only to pull back to find out that it's a stage. It's on stage, and pull back further and you can see the crew around them and the producer and the director. And at this point, when there's a pause in the rehearsal, the producer is speaking to the director and questions one aspect of the production that doesn't make sense to him, and the director responds, "It doesn't have anything to do with anything, but can you imagine the effect on the public?" And isn't that just the absolute best précis of the school of Italian horror cinema that Soavi learnt his apprenticeship in? Michele Soavi's name is often forgotten in the Italian horror director shuffle. I think he only directed 4 features. Please let me know if I'm wrong. But Stage Fright, his first, and then on to The Sect and The Church, rounding out with the phenomenal Dell'Amore, which I've reviewed previously on this channel. I'll put up a clicky box at the end of this video for it. A small CV to be sure, but jam-packed full of talent. Soavi really does deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as the greats. He experienced firsthand the golden age of Italian giallo filmmaking. Argento took him under his wing and he spent time working on sets with Dario Argento, Lamberto Bava, Joe D'Amato. Stage Fright is very much the film of a first-time director finding his feet and cutting his teeth, but also remembering every single lesson he learnt on every one of those sets. I love that this film goes behind the scenes of a theatre group. It suits the overt theatricality of Italian cinema and makes Stage Fright something of a bedfellow of Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace, which is set behind the scenes of a fashion house, and Dario Argento's Opera, which is set behind the scenes of, you guessed it, an opera. But Stage Fright is more of a slasher than a giallo, even though the Venn diagram has an awful lot of overlap. Stage Fright is perhaps more like Halloween than opera in as much as there's no mystery surrounding the identity of the killer. There's no labyrinthine plot twists and reveals. We just get the slashing in much the same way that American slashers do. This is not a whodunit, but it's one of the many howdunnits that the slasher subgenre has spawned, with our killer employing an impressive array of weapons and tools with which to dispatch his victims. However, the film is shot with a panache that is completely at odds with the slasher genre staples of the US and clearly comes out of the giallo school that tries to wring style out of every single shot. Perhaps the epitome of this style at all costs approach is the striking appearance of our killer. No characterless blank white mask here, but a grandly impractical owl headpiece taken from one of the musical's cast. It's so outrageous it sent me scurrying to the internet to try and find a possible thematic reason. Now, I found this concerning the symbology of owls on spiritanimal.info. Owl spirits as messengers of change. Owl spirit animals are symbolic of death in many traditions. In most cases, however, it should not be taken literally. If the owl is associated with death, it can be viewed as symbolic death, meaning a transition in life, important changes that are taking place or about to happen. But honestly, I don't think the symbology of owls was a consideration for the film. Like the best Italian horror cinema, it's done because it looks fucking cool. And as the director in the movie noted earlier, it doesn't have anything to do with anything, but can you imagine the effect on the public? One vital aspect of any 80s movie and any Italian horror movie is the music. And the music for Stage Fright doesn't disappoint. It's as synthy and frenetic as everything you'd expect and want. And being a film set behind the scenes of a stage musical, there's plenty of opportunity for the score to flip between diegetic and non-diegetic music. Indeed, there's a great part in the movie once the killer has everyone trapped so he can work at his leisure, when he turns on the musical's soundtrack really loudly, turning this diegetic source into the movie soundtrack to his own personal killing spree. The real high point of the film for me, though, is once the killer thinks that he's gotten everyone and our final girl watches from the shadows as he creates his own still life in air quotes, on stage with the bodies of his victims. This tableau of bodies and body parts he lays out on stage is amazing, and he just sits there amongst it all with a black cat on his lap, seemingly at peace now as part of his own art installation. And this is followed by a remarkably tense section where our final girl has to traverse the space underneath the stage, beneath this tableau with the killer in the centre of it, to try and retrieve the key that will let her out of this locked space. It's a suspense sequence which would sit very handsomely in Dario Argento's canon, and I can think of no higher praise than that. I think the film's funny as well, intentionally funny. When the locked-in troupe of actors starts running around the place looking for a key, it reminds me of Clue in all the best ways, and I found myself giggling throughout the movie. I'm quite convinced that the over-the-top histrionics is not meant to be taken deadly seriously. I think that's underlined by the final shot, not quite the final shot of the movie, but the final shot of our dead killer. The take doesn't cut when the actor breaks character, but we continue to get a few more frames after that where he turns and looks at the camera and smiles. I've found on Wikipedia, so take this source of information with a pinch of salt, that Soavi stated in an interview that it was a wink and a nudge to the then ongoing theme in American slasher movies of the killer always coming back from the dead. Soavi clearly understands the school of filmmaking he came from. He clearly understands the school of thought of the slasher subgenre, and he's just having so much fun with all of it. It's hard not to have fun with him. There's plenty of kills, there's plenty of gore, there are a plethora of characters who are so self-absorbed because what do you expect, they're actors, darling. that you can't wait for them to be killed. It's not as polished as his later films, but Stage Fright is still a film to have fun with and laugh along with when the metaphorically cutthroat acting business comes face to face with the literally cutthroat slasher business.